This whiskey right here was awarded Bourbon of the Year in 2024. So how good is it actually? Well, we're about to find out. I'm Jeff. This is G Whiskey. Stick around. Bourbon. It's a Malternative, and I found a good one. Welcome to Monthly Malternative, where once a month, or basically whenever I feel like it, I talk about a non-single malt. Today we've got a very popular bourbon that kind of exploded on the scene last year, and since I've never met a popular whiskey that I won't exploit for clicks, I'm jumping on the bandwagon. This whiskey, according to some, is so good that it performs on the same level of, or possibly even exceeds, George T. Stagg. What I'm drinking is Smoky Hill. This one has been doing the rounds on YouTube, or it did last year, and it tends to fare really well with like critics and reviewers. And it won Bourbon of the Year last year in 2024 at the Ascot Awards. And that is where the claim was made, where this can match stuff like George T. Stagg, which is a very bold claim. After that, everyone was scrambling to get their hands on this bottle. All the big bourbon channels have already covered this one. And while the idea that this is better than George T. Stagg is a very contentious one, the consensus seems to be that yes, it is a very good whiskey. This is distilled at MGP in Indiana, which is not called MGP anymore. It's called Ross and Squibb. And unlike most products from Ross and Squibb, this actually has a distinct mash bill because one of the grains that we get in here is heirloom blue corn. There are two versions released of Smoky Hill. There's the regular version and we get the barrel proof version. But apparently in most states, the difference is between $10 to $20. So most people are willing to pay the extra money for that added flavor and intensity. Anyway, back to the blue corn thing. That is not something that Ross and Squibb typically do. Normally, when you're getting a bourbon or a whiskey from them, you're getting their regular high proof bourbon or their rye stuff. And I think they also have a wheated bourbon. But this particular mash bill, I guess, was commissioned specifically for Smoky Hill, which is interesting. In this, we get heirloom blue corn, we get yellow corn, we get rye, and we get malted barley. Now, I've never had blue corn. It sounds colorful. I've never had whiskey made with blue corn either. Apparently, it's darker and richer as opposed to the lighter and sweeter flavors that we get from typical yellow corn. It's also more nut forward and more full body than whiskeys produced with typical yellow corn. At least that's what the internet says. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, this stuff is cask strength or barrel proof. In fact, it's very barrel proof. This comes in at what? 67.1% ABV, which is 134.2 proof. So it'll put some hair on your chest. If you're a man. If you're a woman, it'll... This stuff was distilled at Ross and Squibb, which is in Indiana, but then it was moved to Colorado for its aging process, where it was aged for 5 years. So again, very unique for a Ross and Squibb product. In terms of the look of the bottle itself, I think it looks good. I do like it. It's a unique, very broad, very squat bottle, which I appreciate because I live in an earthquake zone, so it's unlikely to tip over. Beyond that, nice enough label. The standout aspect for me about this presentation, though, is the cap. I think it's made of like pewter or something, and it's heavy. By the way, before we move on to our tasting notes, quick plug. This segment is brought to us by Fruit Bat. These guys are a specialist retailer. They sell scotch, bourbon, brandy, rum, even stuff like tequila. So they have a little bit of everything, and beyond the standard stuff, they have a lot of very rare and collectible bottles, especially when it comes to bourbon and American whiskeys, which I'll admit, I do have a growing appreciation for. I'll link to this bottle on their website. You guys can go check it out. I've also got a code for free shipping, which I believe only works within the United States. And again, thank you to Fruit Bat for sending over this bottle. Now, getting back on track, our big question for today is this bottle going to be able to compete with George T. Stagg? Which I don't own and also have never tried. So that'll be a tough comparison. What I do have, though, is a Stagg. Granted, this one is Georgeless and it is tealess, but it is a Stagg. It's the basic version, but it's very, very good. I've reviewed this one before, and I've done the comparison between this one and the Smoky prior to doing this video. So I'll tell you how these two size up against each other. And I think we're ready to jump into our tasting notes, so let's do that. In the meantime, if you'll kindly leave a like down below, that'd be greatly appreciated. On the nose, this is very intense, very heavy, lots of caramelized brown sugar sweetness, loads of tobacco. There's vanilla, some oak, cinnamon, and nutmeg. There is some nuttiness in here, as well as a tiny touch of sharpness. The palate finish is extremely intense. It's an attack of oak and spice, and then we move on to some vanilla and some really strong tobacco notes. Then we transition into some dark fruity notes. This is a very oaky base with some sort of like dark earthiness to it and a surprising amount of depth behind it. Then we move on to some faint rye grassiness. We get loads of oak in here. There's nutmeg, cinnamon, chili, brown sugar. There's also a chocolatiness in here, almost like chocolate chip cookies or something. Wonderful intensity. Oh, and there's also a touch of minerals on the late finish. Interesting. All right, so this is a very nice bourbon. It's interesting, not in the sense that it's reinventing the wheel or anything like that, but it's more about the execution. More specifically, the amount of depth and body that this has make it a standout. This is a whiskey with a lot of weight to it. I do actually get the Stagg comparison. Of course, it is different from Stagg, but if you look behind the surface layers of like sweetness, you get this really deep, rich, earthy intensity, like Stagg. Now, I'm assuming the blue corn played some kind of substantial role in shaping the profile of this whiskey. I can't say for sure, but what I can say for sure is that as someone who's had a few Ross and Squibb products in my time, I'm sure most bourbon lovers have, this is a unique product from that distillery. It's different. As for that Stagg comparison, as I said earlier, I've never tried the George T. Stagg, so I can't really say, but what I do have is a couple of the regular Staggs on the go currently. So how does this square up against your standard Stagg? Well, Stagg is still better. If you check some of the other bourbon channels, most of whom have tried the George T. Stagg and said, okay, it is good whiskey, but it's not as good as George T. Stagg, I'll take it a step further and say it's not as good as any Stagg. But I would argue that that comment at the Ascot Awards, where they compared this to George T. Stagg, and the resulting Stagg comparisons that followed, did Smoke Eye Hill a bit of a disservice. I'm sure their sales shot up, so they're just fine with it. But if you go into this expecting a Stagg, you might be disappointed. If you come into this expecting just a really good, solid, and particularly deep and rich bourbon, you're going to enjoy it. But if we're going to insist on that comparison, even the regular Stagg, I think, wins by a pretty good margin. Stagg is legendary stuff for good reason. It's sought after for good reason. Certainly there are some similarities in there, but we also have some pretty staggering differences. The biggest difference here is age. Stagg, I believe, is known to be between 8 and 10 years old. This one, of course, is a 5-year-old, and it tastes younger. Nothing wrong with that. It is younger. It's marketed as a younger whiskey, whereas we don't have an age statement on the Stagg. So more transparency points for these guys. But does it taste younger? Absolutely. The Stagg just gives us more of those really decadent, heavy, lush, rich, sweet notes. We get more caramel. We get more leather in there. I prefer it just because it does go that much deeper. That's what she said. So again, don't expect this to be as good as a Stagg, but do expect it to be good. And I think for a commissioned MGP product with a distinct mash bill and Colorado maturation, all of which is completely new to me, they've managed to do a lot in 5 years. One thing to keep in mind about this whiskey, though, is that it is not delicate. If you are looking for proof of the barrel variety, this one has you covered. When they say barrel proof, they mean it. So it's good for that audience. If you're the type of person who likes Stagg and tempers their expectations a little bit, you'll like this. This is also good for fans of Elijah Craig barrel proof, Larceny barrel proof, Jack Daniel's single barrel proof, Tennessee whiskey, Booker's, that kind of whiskey. So just the high intensity, powerful, punch you in the face kind of bourbon. This goes in that category. Now for scoring, if you remember from the last episode, the scoring for this series is different. A lot of people get confused and annoyed by the Scotch scoring system, which I kind of get. So we just do a simple 1 to 10 for these Malternatives. And this one is going to get a solid 8. It's a great bourbon. It's a great Malternative. It's sub 100. It's typically much easier to find than stuff like the Staggs. Wonderful intensity. So there's a lot going on for this stuff. So highly recommended, and that's about all I have to say for this session of Monthly Malternative. I'm curious what you guys want me to look at next. I don't necessarily want to just keep on sticking to bourbons. We've done 2 episodes so far, both have been bourbons. I'd like to branch out. That's why I kind of work with Fruit Bat, because they have a lot of stuff that we don't have access to here in Taiwan. Locally, loads of Scotch single malts, but when it comes to like rums, bourbons, brandies, very limited. So yeah, if there's anything on the Fruit Bat website, or if there's Malternatives in general that you want me to look at, you can let me know what they are down below. And I think we've now reached the point where I send the question back to you guys. Have you tried Smoke Eye Hill? What did you think about it? How does it size up against other bourbons at its price point? How would you size it up against Stagg? Is that a fair comparison at all? Let me know all of that down below. And that will now bring us to the end of the video. So guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to help support the channel, I have Patreon and PayPal linked down below. Every little bit helps if you're already a channel member or a patron. Thank you very much for the contribution, patrons over there, and we will catch you in the next video. Bye, guys.